Healing. You are not your parents' thoughts. This book is dedicated to the healed version of you. It's time to meet them. Before I begin, I am nervous. Thank you. I was going to say thank you so much for being here, but thank you so much for downloading a copy of this book, audiobook. Thank you. It means the world to me. I'm panicking that I'm going to breathe too much, or you're going to hear my kids screaming or singing Let It Go, or I'm going to stutter over my own words. So I'll try and edit this as little as possible. Let's begin. Healing. You are not your parents' thoughts. Introduction. When we are children, we have no right to question if our parents are right or wrong. Whatever they say, their actions and behaviours, and more importantly, the way they make us feel, we must believe is correct and from a place of love. It cannot be a natural, instinctive thought for us as young children that our parents do not want the best for us. We absorb all the information that our parents give us, and this information is what makes or breaks us as individuals. The thing is, our parents don't just tell us about the world, but they also tell us about ourselves. Our brains, being like sponges as infants, just take this information as gospel truth, and in turn, our parents' core beliefs very quickly become ours. Let's take religion, for example. If a child is born into a heavily religious family, then that child grows up with a fear of committing sin that ultimately leads to hell. It would be bizarre for a child to go against the words of his parents because he has nowhere to compare. Similarly, if a child grows up in a household where the parental figures are alcoholics, that child has no room to question whether that's normal or not. Can you see where this can lead? On the surface level, a parent may repeat phrases like, money is evil, money doesn't grow on trees, or all rich people are greedy, and the child then grows up not only fearing wealth, but also unable to see any hope of financial freedom. However, this is simply about passing on an idea or opinion. What happens if that negative belief is about the child themselves? You see, a narcissistic parent, for example, will belittle their own child to make themselves feel better. More specifically, that parent will bring down their offspring about certain areas of the child's life that the child is happy with, where the parent is unhappy with the same thing regarding their own lives. If you are happy with your body image because society hasn't yet told you that you shouldn't be, yet your parents are unhappy with the way they look, they may bring you down about the way you look to make them feel better about their own bodies. If you get a promotion at work and your parents are struggling financially or working a job they hate, you may hear something along the lines of, how do you think it makes me feel that you're earning that amount of money, yet I can't afford to pay my bills? The same applies for romantic relationships. If you find yourself in a happy and healthy relationship, yet a parent of yours is in an unhappy marriage or struggling to find a partner, they will criticize your relationship to make them feel more comfortable with their own situation. You are not your parents' words. You are not your parents' thoughts. As an adult, it becomes a terribly depressing situation. We are faced with a person who believes that they love their parents and that their parents love them, yet have never felt loved and have nothing to love about their parents. This person will constantly look for love, yet feel undeserving of it, so will then self-sabotage if love appears. We'll dive into that later on. How rude of me. Hello, my name is Ben. I too thought my childhood was normal up until around 4 years ago. Since then, I've been on a mission of self-discovery and emotional awareness. My certifications are in life coaching and professional relationship counselling. However, they mean absolutely nothing, as all the advice I give comes from experience. In January 2023, I randomly decided to create a TikTok page, shortly followed by an Instagram, to share my experiences and offer my insight, and since then, I've amassed a combined total of 676,000 followers at the time of writing here, which is the 14th of the 3rd, 24. Before I knew it, helping people overcome their own childhood traumas became my full-time job, giving me the honour of helping people all over the world as clients. To be in a place where I'm able to write this book for you because apparently you find comfort in my words, imposter syndrome is still in full swing and I will never take your compliments, is an absolute blessing. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. Thank you so much for downloading a copy of this book and welcome to your new safe place. We are here to understand, to heal and to reinvent ourselves. It's time for us to take back our power, protect our peace, and to overcome the trauma that we endured as children. The words in this book will bring up unresolved issues from your childhood, and this isn't going to feel good initially. However, it is what's needed. We have to allow our trauma to mentally resurface in order to face our once buried thoughts and win. Prepare to shed a few tears, and please remember, healing isn't supposed to be easy, but at the end of healing is peace. Take a breath. Let's begin. Gradual awareness. When I created my account on TikTok, I had no idea how the platform itself worked. Initially, I created the page to talk about my parenting and childhood, but very quickly turned into sharing my own experiences once I saw how many people had been through the same thing, whilst also believing that it was normal to be treated that way. Before I uploaded my first video, I searched my mother's name to see if she had an account, and then proceeded to block her. I did this to protect her image, this perception of herself that she had built up throughout her life that I was conditioned to believe. I knew that if I was going to talk about parenting and the way that I parent my own children, then it would completely go against and contradict the way that she parented me. I blocked her because I didn't want to hurt her feelings and be a bad child. Here's lesson number 1. You cannot be a good child to a bad parent. This isn't repeated in my ebook, but I'm going to repeat it for you in my audiobook. You cannot be a good child to a bad parent. I posted my first video about how our parents hate the fact that we are better parents than they were because we have access to more information and are more accountable and patient. However, as we've just gone over, the true reason they hate seeing our own children happier than we were as kids is because it means we are doing a better job at parenting than them, which they cannot fathom as it disagrees with their belief that they are the best parents in the world. I then went on to post 2 videos where I spoke about things you may have experienced if you grew up with emotionally immature or narcissistic parents. I didn't use my own name on my account at this point and didn't post it anywhere else, again to protect my mother's image. Even further, in my videos I would say, when I was a child, a parent, because half of my followers were from the US, so those who didn't know me personally wouldn't know that my father had passed away in 2020. Therefore, they'd not know which parent I was talking about. Before I knew it though, those 2 videos had gained around 7 million views between them, and that's where I learned how TikTok works. I was leaving the house one day and my next door neighbour came outside. "Me and my girlfriend love watching your videos, Ben," he said. Shit. I remember shortly after I received a notification of a new follower who happened to live on the street in front of my mother. At this point I realised it was only a matter of time before my mother saw the videos herself. The phone call arrives a week or so later and goes like this. "I'm just letting you know that I've seen the videos of you slagging me off. That's it for me and you. We're done." I text her to explain that people aren't watching my videos and thinking of her, and that they are relating it to their own experiences and finding help and comfort. However, that was it. Don't get me wrong, I had cut contact with her several times in the past, but always made up due to the guilt. This time it was her who cut contact, which made me feel even more guilty. After she ended the call, I was immediately riddled with anxiety. How could I make it up to her? How could I be a good child again? Upon reflection, I just wanted her in my life and happy so I could feel loved. However, the evidence proves that I had never felt love from her in the first place. What's funny is that up until that point, I was only making videos about experiences such as when my mother stopped me going to Disneyland with my grandmother the day before because she found out a woman on the same coach trip was dating my father at the time. A few weeks later, I received a phone call from the police telling me that my content online was causing my mother distress. Isn't it fascinating to study how the mind of someone like that works? Filled with guilt and grief, I sat down at the dining table wondering whether I should delete my videos. Then my wife spoke. This is a question to ask yourself if you have cut contact with your parents or are debating it. My wife said, "What are you missing out on?" The more I thought about it, the more I could see how much more peace would now flow into my life. What would I be missing out on? Literally nothing. I explored it a little further and learned how much more I would benefit without her in my life. Whenever my mother would visit, I would have to make sure the house was super clean in fear of getting judged. For the duration of the visit, I would be sat in a ball of tension waiting for something negative to be said to me. If I plucked up the courage to start a conversation about something going on in my life, I knew that it would simply not be listened to. Therefore, I could now be more me. We typically have a gradual awareness that our childhoods aren't as great as we are conditioned to believe. As a child, I had a best friend named Dylan. There was a time where, during the summer break from school, I would sleep over Dylan's house one night, and the next night he'd sleep over mine, virtually every night. When it would get to around 6 p.m, Dylan would politely ask for something to eat whilst at my house. As a child, I would simply think he was being greedy or that his parents must have been overfeeding him, because why on earth would he want to eat again? When it was my turn to stay the night at his house, Dylan's parents would cook full meals in the evening. It would blow my mind. I genuinely thought that they were just showing off and trying to impress me. We all think that our own individual experience is the only correct way to live, so I couldn't even begin to imagine that my mother underfeeding me whilst simultaneously belittling me for being skinny wasn't the right thing to do. Some of us start college, university, or even our first jobs, and we're just having a chat and a laugh with our friends/colleagues, and we mention something along the lines of, yeah, I remember being beaten as a child for doing that, and then everyone stops laughing. It's like, oh shit, you guys didn't get hit. When I first met my wife, I moved in with her parents, and her brother for around a year and a half. It was mind-boggling for me to experience what I did during the first week alone. 2 parents sat next to each other on a sofa, everyone eating dinner together and planning family days out. What the fuck is this? Evening time would arrive and my in-laws would prepare food just in time for Britain's Got Talent, so we could all eat and watch television together. In my household, everyone would be in their own separate bedrooms with zero communication to anyone else in the house. I can vividly remember standing outside my mother's bedroom, telling her that I missed her. How strange is that? For a lot of us, however, it takes becoming a parent ourselves to realise what we were put through. We look at our own children and question how our parents could do what they did to something so innocent. Something that becomes extremely confusing for us as children, and even as adults, is when our parents live perception first. This is when an individual, typically a narcissist, cares more about how they look and how the family looks than how it actually is. There are many ways that this way of living can manifest. Firstly, many of our parents had children for the idea of a family, to hold up this image of having their shit together. They wanted children but didn't want to be parents. We also see this perception first way of living when we experience big traumas within the family, and our parents brush it under the rug like it never happened, to protect that family image. Many of our parents will push us to do well in school exams, not for us to actually excel in life, but for when others ask your parents what results and grades you achieved, and they can give good answers to not only claim your success as their own, but also again to hold up that image of the perfect family. This school example can also be why, as adults, we strive so much for success in our careers, for the validation. When we get bad grades, our parents hated us, so when we had good grades, we linked it with being loved. Living perception first also confuses us in public situations as children. At home, there may be tension, anger, and violence, but out in public with your parents, everything is image, image, image. Your parents may bump into a friend of theirs in a supermarket, and that friend asks about you. All of a sudden, your parents are the most loving and supportive parents you'd ever meet. Like, where was this at home? I remember my mother posting a huge paragraph on social media about how proud she was of me for being the first in the family to get into university. Yet she said nothing to me personally. This way of living means that we have to relearn how relationships work as adults. Our parents force us to believe that what they give us is love. They say things like, I sacrificed so much for you, you should worship me, and I put a roof over your head. So as children, our only option here is to think, oh wow, that's so kind and generous of you. You must be an amazing parent. I should be super grateful, and this is love. Can you imagine the consequences if we were to say, what did you sacrifice? Our parents set the bar so low for love that as adults we have to recondition our minds regarding it. What happens if our parents make fun of us and are our first bullies, yet make us believe that it's love? As adults, we get into relationships with people who treat us the same, and our immediate thought is, wow, this must be love, because it feels so familiar. So many people believe that they attract toxic relationships, but that simply isn't the case. We fall into these toxic and unhealthy relationships because they feel comfortable. If our parents are abusive and then as an adult someone says, I like your hair, you almost immediately fall in love. How can someone treat me so nicely? This must be my soulmate, right? On the other hand, someone may give you a compliment and you simply refuse to believe it. How could you possibly feel deserving of a compliment? We can sometimes even get defensive when someone compliments us because it's so far out of our comfort zone that it makes us feel unsafe. Safety and anxiety. After working with over 800 clients, I have discovered that whether we go through physical or emotional abuse, our traumas can manifest themselves in the same way later on in our lives. I've dealt with clients whose parents are millionaires and bought their children everything they wanted, but never showed them actual love. And I have clients whose parents are in jail for the abuse they put them through. Both sets of clients there may show the same behaviours regarding areas like receiving love as adults. If a parent physically hits you, 2 weeks later it may no longer hurt. However, when a parent says, "I wish you were never born," you always remember, and it always hurts. Whether the abuse is physical or emotional, what happens is our sense of safety is taken away from us. Alongside the lack of safety, we develop this anxiety that says, when and where is something going to go wrong? When am I going to be hurt again? We have to stay in line and obey, because outside of that obedience is consequence. As we've now established, we cannot question what is right or wrong as children, so we don't necessarily feel unsafe or anxious. We simply believe that this feeling must be a common feeling shared amongst everyone else during our childhood, and that fear is nothing but normality. Due to this feeling of normality, anxiety and fear very quickly become a big part of who we are as individuals. The anxiety effortlessly weaves its way into our personalities without us realizing, and then as adults we still find ourselves waiting for the danger. Being unknowingly forced into that fight or flight during our childhood makes it extremely difficult to get back out of it, because we have no idea that we're still living in it. In our present lives, this anxiety is constantly on the lookout for danger. Happiness is completely out of our comfort zone, so the feeling of comfort and peace terrifies us. When there is nothing in our lives that is currently going wrong, it just doesn't feel right. It never feels like happiness belongs to us. Our childhoods were often chaotic, so that same familiar chaos is what we search for. If there is no chaos, then oftentimes we will strive to create it. This is where we self-sabotage in relationships, for example. If our partners are nice to us, then it confuses us, so we put our walls up to create the pain ourselves. Even though our childhoods were unhealthy and toxic, it happened for so many years and we survived. So now when you look back at your childhood, your brain thinks that it's a safe place, because even though the toxicity lasted for so long, you survived. So when you have peace and contentment in your adult life, your brain will feed you fear-based negative thoughts to take you back to mentally living in that same fear as you did as a child, because it thinks that's the safest place. When happiness tries to stick around, that is seen as unsafe, so your brain just tries to protect you from the unknown by taking you back to the known. When we are children and we are constantly waiting for danger, it forces us to be so focused on the fear of the present moment that more often than not it becomes extremely difficult to look to the future with a positive outlook. We train ourselves to focus on the bad stuff for so long that it would be strange for us to assume that there is light at the end of the tunnel. To put it bluntly, being in this state of survival takes away our childhood. We have this responsibility for our own safety instead of love, opportunity, and freedom to be a child. We get put into this metaphorical box that we stay in until our teenage years or early adulthood, or maybe you've only just exited the box in your 60s. What brings us out of that box is a greater awareness of our upbringing and bigger questions towards our parents. When we come out of that box, however, we usually have no idea who the fuck we are. To survive, we had to become this shell of who we were supposed to be. We forced ourselves into an autopilot and dissociated to keep safe. We bury any negative thoughts we have along the way and refuse to believe in the happy ones. So, who are you? On a spiritual level, that's an extremely deep question, possibly the deepest you'll ever ask yourselves. Let me ask you this. Without telling me your name, who are you? Most people here will say their occupation or title. I am a mother and a nurse. Okay, sure, then hypothetically, when your children move to the other side of the world and you lose your job, who are you then? Hobbies. Let us talk about hobbies. There is so much to unpack and recondition here. So many of us tell ourselves these small white lies to feel as though we have control over our thoughts and lives. When I ask clients and even in seminars about hobbies, here are some extremely common answers. I don't have any time for hobbies. I wish I had hobbies, but nothing interests me. I can't stick to a hobby. My hobby is going to the gym. My hobby is reading. Let's explore. If you believe that you have zero time for yourself to have a hobby, it can be very interesting to check your average daily screen time on your phone. How much Netflix do you watch? How much doom scrolling do you do before you fall asleep? Sometimes it is less about having time and more so about prioritizing it. What if you wish you had a hobby but you believe nothing interests you? Here's a question. How many things have you tried in the last year? The answer is usually 0. Okay, so what if you do try a new hobby and it feels great and you get excited, and then within a month you're bored and no longer interested in that hobby? Maybe you even pick up a new hobby and yet the same routine repeats itself. The answer can be obvious and rather simple here. What if that's just not your thing? Before my first child was born, paddleboarding was my thing. Near enough every morning I would head to the beach and into the water. After around 2 months, it started to feel different. I would see jellyfish pass under my board and I'd see ripples in the water without being able to see what they belonged to. I would be the only one on the water, and the fear that started to creep in took away the enjoyment. So I stopped. I was frustrated with myself. I believed that it was an issue with myself and that I was unable to keep a hobby. Then one day in August 2023, I discovered these plastic bricks called Lego, and boy was I hooked. I got so excited about building and collecting more that I even got scared that it would turn out to be another phase hobby and not a true passion or anything similar. It took me a lot of trial and error to find this hobby. So here's the thing about hobbies. A hobby is something that makes you feel like you. It's something that excites you. A hobby brings you into the present moment. It doesn't take you away from it. But Ben, my hobby is going to the gym, but it doesn't make me feel like that. If your hobby does not feel like how I've just described, then here are a few simple questions to ask. Is your hobby a distraction? Is it something that takes you away from the present moment? Is your hobby a release? Reading can be a great hobby and it's one of mine, but it can also be a safe place. If reading is your hobby now, was it your safe place as a child? Here's how we figure out if it's a hobby or not. Do you do it in a good mood too? When you're feeling happy and things are great, do you want to read then? Many of us tell ourselves these lies because deep down we believe that we are undeserving of having that time to ourselves. We are overcome with so much guilt simply for spending half an hour alone that we build these lies such as, nothing interests me, to avoid the hobby and ultimately avoid the guilt. You deserve that time to yourself. You time. Whilst we talk about alone time, here is something else that will help. This needs to be the one thing that you take from this book, but it's not an easy thing to do. Without using the word meditation, I would extremely encourage you to give yourself some silence throughout the day. This can be 3 times a day or once a week. Whenever you feel like dissociating, pulling out your phone or opening Netflix, do this instead. Set a 10 to 15 minute timer, put your phone on Do Not Disturb and place it out of arm's reach and just sit. Some clients have to start with 30 seconds, so please don't be discouraged if you cannot do more than a few seconds. Many of us have trouble getting to sleep at night, and we automatically assume that it's a sleep thing. However, if you actually question it, do you have a problem with your sleep? Or do you have a problem with your thoughts? Many of us will even scroll or watch TV until we crash and fall asleep to avoid the thoughts altogether. As children and even into our teenage years and adulthood, we may tell our parents things that we are stressed about and worried about, and their response is, "What have you got to be stressed about? How do you think I feel?" A lot of children become the therapist or emotional punchbag for their parents and are conditioned to listen to problems and not express their own. Another common phrase heard in similar households is, children should be seen and not heard. What this does is teach us that our thoughts and feelings do not matter. Due to this, whenever we get negative thoughts as adults, we bury them. We may have thoughts about our traumas, the past, finances, relationships, anxiety for the future, and all we can do is push them down and hide from them by dissociating as though they do not exist. What else are we going to do? If our parents are mentally 15 years old and cannot express or regulate emotions in a healthy way, who are we going to learn from? If we only see our parents use either anger or the silent treatment, then it would be insane to think that we could just process our emotions with ease. We make ourselves hide from ourselves for the majority of the day. We work, we keep busy, we clean, we find things to occupy our time, we scroll and we consume, all to avoid ourselves. Unfortunately, this way of living also avoids our own healing. We do all of this mental numbing, and then we get into bed at the end of the day, put our phones down, and our brain says, "Finally, I can think." That's when we are bombarded with thoughts. These thoughts usually arrive in order too. We receive thoughts from the day, then the week, then the month, and eventually the big negative thoughts about our lives in general. You are giving your brain a safe place to think, so it all comes up to the surface, and it's not easy. When you put your phone down at the end of the day and have nothing to do but try and get to sleep, that's the only mental freedom you get all day. Giving yourself that same silence for 10 minutes in the middle of the day will do wonders for your mental clarity and even your sleep. This is the main issue that people face. Actually, this is the main issue that people do not face: their own mind. Just the thought of silence on its own can also be terrifying. Again, if we are so used to the chaos, then that silence really can be deafening. In that last paragraph, I chose my words carefully. I stated that we receive thoughts. It is very empowering, freeing even, to acknowledge that we are but the observer of our thoughts, not always the conscious thinker. As children, we truly think that the world is ours. We believe that we can be, do, and have whatever we want and that nothing will stop us. As adults, our words and beliefs have changed. This typically occurs when our enthusiasm has been pushed out of us, whether the pusher is our parents, teachers, or society itself. People only doubt your dreams and ambitions when they haven't yet achieved their own. Here is where we combine all of the previous pages. During our childhoods, we are extremely impressionable and have to believe what our parents say. So if a parent says or makes you feel that you aren't good enough and that no one will ever love you, you believe it. Why would your parents, who give you unconditional love and support, lie to you, right? When they doubt you and belittle you throughout your entire childhood and teenage years, and then as an adult you move out and no longer hear their hateful words every day, it just doesn't feel right. What happens again is that your brain looks back on your childhood, sees it as a safe place, and tries to recreate that safety. This is when you receive all of those negative words again, in the form of thoughts. You repeat those same words of feeling undeserving of love to make you feel safe. Your thoughts aren't always yours. Human beings have around 60 to 70,000 thoughts each day, and we do not have the mental energy to think of them all. They just pop into your brain intrusively. Once you come to terms with the fact that you are simply the observer of your thoughts, everything changes. With this awareness, when a negative thought about yourself appears in your mind, you can visualize the letters and words, watch it appear within your mind, then more importantly, question its origin. For example, let's say a parent makes fun and criticizes their children's body for being overweight. Firstly, they usually do this when they are unhappy with their own self-image, so they choose to bring you down when they see you happy with the way you look, just to feel a bit better about themselves. Secondly, I always find it fascinating how a parent makes fun of their child for weighing too much or not weighing enough, when it's that same parent that feeds them. Lastly, that child will grow up and repeat the same phrases to themselves. Our parents' voices become our inner critic. We believe that these insecurities are developed by ourselves and not given to us by our parents. A parent will say, "You need to lose weight because no one will love you if you're fat." That same child later on in life will be in a supermarket about to pick up a sweet treat, and the thought that they'll receive is, "I need to lose weight because no one will love me if I'm fat." You are the observer. These are not your thoughts. The reason that I didn't call this meditation to begin with is because you may have already tried to meditate. So many people sit down ready to meditate, then abandon ship because they can't do it, they are bad at it, or they can't quieten their minds. Meditation is simply the awareness of your thoughts. Think about that. We usually have these, what I like to call, underlying emotions. These underlying emotions are usually our default states of being. If we are made to feel as though we are burdens as children, then that can very easily become who we are at our core. I have this umbrella theory. At the top of this umbrella is, if my parents can't love me, why the fuck would anyone else? This branches off into, if my parents can't be proud of me, why would I expect anyone else to? Why would I be proud of myself? And also, if I can't talk about my own feelings with my parents, why would I feel deserving of anyone else's time to talk about them? If our parents make us feel like burdens, then of course that becomes how we view ourselves regarding anyone else's time. If your underlying emotion is feeling like a burden, then that feeling sits like a black hole within you, and the slightest of perceived negativity throughout the day can trigger you and bring you back down to it. If you are in work and your boss subtly tells you that your performance is declining, then immediately you mentally travel from one negative thought to the next, each one getting more and more negative until you reach the underlying emotion of feeling like a burden. When your boss hints that you should be doing a better job, your thought process goes something like this: I'm no good at my job. If I'm no good at my job, then I'm not worthy of being here. If I'm not worthy of working here, then I should just quit so everyone else is happier. If I stay here, then I'm simply an inconvenience and a burden to everyone. Very quickly, we bring ourselves back down to that underlying emotion. The thing is, though, we like it there, feeling like a burden. Experiencing this sadness and the desire for invisibility is the most comfortable place for us because it's the most known. Sometimes we even unknowingly but intentionally self-sabotage to allow ourselves to sit in that comfortable yet unhealthy place. When we get stuck in these mental spaces filled with negative emotion, it is often because we are unaware that we ourselves are the only ones with the power to get out of that state. Here are 5 very important questions that you need to ask yourself when you want to go from a bad mood to a good one. Sometimes we get stuck in a rut and have no idea how to navigate a way out. These questions are simple, but they really do work. Question 1. What emotion am I feeling? All of your answers here are valid. What emotion am I feeling right now? Your answers may be anger, frustration, run down, depressed, lost, anxious, or whatever best describes your current mental state at that time. Question 2. Why am I feeling this way? This can be your boss, a colleague, your husband, your finances, your parents. Question 3. Can I do anything about it? If you can, great. That's another story altogether. If you cannot do anything about it, then that's even better. This gives us the knowledge that we are choosing to stay in a bad mood for zero reason. That negative way of thinking does not serve us whatsoever. If we see that we are in a bad mood and cannot do anything about it, it allows us to draw a line and gives us the freedom to ask ourselves question number 4. Question 4. What emotion do I want to feel right now? Your answers may be to feel calm, less stressed, happy, excited, joyful, or maybe just normal. Suppose we want to feel happy. Everyone does, right? If we want to feel happy, then it becomes vital to know what that looks like. In today's society, I just want to be happy has become such a simple throwaway statement. However, if we have no idea what happiness truly looks like, then we will have no idea when we get there. It can even become an exciting exercise to visualize what this happy version of you looks like. Once you've got that image in mind, then it's time for the last question. Question 5. What can I do to feel that way right now? What can you do right now, within the next hour or by the end of the day, to feel that happiness? For me, and potentially for you, it's singing and dancing. Stay with me. I have 3 young children and 2 dogs, therefore something always needs to be cleaned. When I feel myself in a bad mood and I get to question 5, I will clean the kitchen, for example, whilst listening to music. Cleaning the kitchen itself will take me an hour longer than it should because I'm fully imagining there's an audience as I bust a move and sing my heart out. Moving like this also tricks your body into thinking you're safe and free. I would be tempted to use the word impossible here, but it would be extremely difficult for your emotions to not at least slightly elevate when doing this. What can you do today to bring you closer to happiness? Your parents. Now it's time to talk about your parents. This can feel difficult at first because sometimes we are still so desperate to protect our parents' image. Talking about our parents in a negative way can bring on so much guilt, even though we're just sharing the truth. Here are some simple questions that can have huge impacts. During sessions with clients, this is where the tears flow. Tissues at the ready. Question 1. Benefit. Please tell me the current benefit of having your parents in your life. Common answers here include, it's the only family I have. They are my parents. To keep the peace, and so I don't feel guilty. We use that phrase, to keep the peace, frequently. However, if we really think about it, whose peace are we keeping? It certainly isn't ours. The most common answer to this question is usually, oh shit, there isn't one. Was that yours? When our parents repeat things like, what would you do without me, during our childhoods, then we simply believe it, and this core belief makes us keep them in our lives. Question 2. Debt. What do you think you owe your parents? Is your answer everything? Many clients will say success, love, or my time, but the true answer is nothing. We never owe our parents anything. You can have the best parents in the world and you can even give them your all, but there's no obligation. Dr. Wayne Dyer said, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So I would encourage you to change your perspective here if you believe you owe your parents anything by asking you this. What do your children, or what would your hypothetical children, owe you? Nothing, of course. See how easy it is to answer? Our decision to bring our children into our lives. So if anything, we owe them. Question 3. Love. This is an extremely easy question, but you may need to take your time answering it. Do you love your parents? If it takes you more than 2 or 3 seconds to answer, then ask yourself the same question about someone in your life that you do love. Do you love your spouse, your children, your best friend? If the answer is truly yes, then you'll be able to immediately say it so. If a stranger walked past you on the street and I asked you if you loved them, you'd say, of course not, I don't even know them. Exactly. Easy question, right? So, do you love your parents? If the answer is yes, then tell me why. Why do you love that parent? Here are a few common answers and how they are bullshit. Clients may say, I love my parents because they are my parents. Great, but do they feel like parents? People like you and I are very logical people because we've had to be to avoid punishment. If you love your parents because they are my parents, but they actually don't feel like parents, then that doesn't make sense, right? I love my parents, Ben, because if I needed them, they would be there. The choice of wording used here is always the same, and it's really telling. If and would. What you're giving me here is a hypothetical situation. If you needed your parents, they would be there. This isn't evidence-based. Can you give me an example of when they were actually there for you? I recently asked a client to give me an example of how their father was there for them, and she said, if it's 2 a.m. on a night out and I call my father, he will pick me up, and has done before. My response was, so just to clarify, you love your father because he picks you up sometimes. Can you imagine asking our own children why they love us, and they give us an answer like that? I then asked my client if they were on a night out and phoned a taxi, and the taxi took them home. Would they love the driver? I love my parents, Ben, because they are good grandparents to my kids. Are they? Are they good grandparents, or are they just no longer abusive? If our parents were physically and emotionally abusive to us, and then with our kids they simply aren't abusive, we see that as loving and caring. Compare how our parents are with our kids to how they were with us, and it's worlds apart. If you then compared how they grandparent to how you parent, maybe they no longer look so loving. If you do come to the conclusion that you don't love your parents, that's not your fault. They didn't deserve you. We have given our parents chances time and time again to not only be the parents that we deserved, but also the parents that they already think they are. If we say that we don't love a parent, it's on them. Whether they have done one thing or a number of things throughout our lives, they have made us say no. We all deserve to have parents to love, and if we don't, it's not our fault. We often hold on to the good bits of parenting that our parents did, or just believe what they told us, and forget about the bad stuff. And we do this in order to feel like we had better, safer, and more loving parents and childhoods. We also ruin it for ourselves and create our own sadness by thinking that they have the same hearts as us. We hold on to the hope that one day they will finally take accountability and become the parents that we needed all those years ago. Many of us hold on to this hypothetical parent. During the question about what your children owe you, something else is usually uncovered. If you don't have any children, do you want any? If you do not want to have children, then that is absolutely fine and completely your choice. However, I always like to ask why. So many people are afraid to have children because they don't want to pass on the trauma and or become their parents. People tell me that it wouldn't be fair to have children because they themselves had no healthy parental role model. Here's the thing. The one thing that you have to give your parents is that they taught you how not to do it. Your parents handed you the blueprint to bad parenting. All you need to do is the opposite. Just the desire to be a better parent than your parents makes you 100 times better than them already. If you had children and started parenting in the way that you were parented, you'd stop because you know how it feels. People like us will give the love that we never received, so don't be too hard on yourself. A lot of it is just that repetitive self-doubt, feeling like we would fail as parents. So if you don't want to have children, absolutely fine. but it needs to be your decision and not this overbearing thought of becoming your parents. No contact. Apologies for all the questions, but here's another. Do you want your parents in your life? After all, even though they conditioned you to believe the opposite, this is your life. It's healthy for you to weigh the pros and cons of having any contact with your parents, and it's not something that should make you feel guilty. I'm never one to promote no contact, but I am the advocate of peace, whatever shape or form that takes. In these situations, the form that peace manifests into is no contact. Here are 3 steps that you can take, with the last step being no contact. The steps are as follows. Accountability. This is a conversation with your parents. You explain in the nicest and least offensive way possible that the way in which your parents raised you has ultimately resulted in you seeking help and guidance in adulthood to overcome certain learned behaviours. A healthy, emotionally mature and accountable parent's response would include, I am so sorry, I genuinely thought that I was trying my best, but now I can see my mistakes. How can I make it up to you? How can I be a better parent now? If your parent is emotionally immature or narcissistic, then their response may be something along the lines of, how dare you? I sacrificed so much for you. You should worship me. I was a fantastic parent. How do you think this makes me feel? You've hurt me too. Does that sound more likely and more familiar? Truth is, step 1 here doesn't usually work with the kinds of parents in question. I use the word usually here because out of 800 plus clients, maybe 2 parents have taken slight accountability. Moving on to step 2. Boundaries. Boundaries can take on many forms. For example, if you're currently speaking to your parents once a day, we can cut it to once a week. If you visit your parents once a week and it drains your energy, we can cut it to once every 2 weeks. The way you put these boundaries in place is up to you. Here are 2 options. You can either tell your parents that you need space and require less contact, or you simply contact them less. Telling your parents that you need less contact from them, however, is a funny one. If you were to contact your parents and tell them that you would like to stop texting them daily and instead converse 2 or 3 times a week, how would that go down? Usually they would go from texting you once a day to texting you once an hour. They become immediately defensive as they believe that their authority is at risk. Their inner monologue is, you don't make the rules, bitch. They have the need to reinforce that you are the child in the relationship, so they will go as far as doing the opposite of what you actually said. The next step is the final step. No contact. If you make the decision to go no contact with your parents, there are several bits of information that I'd like to give you. Firstly, no contact is for you. You have lived your life in the shadow of your parents as an extension of them. Your parents think that this is their life and that you're just a part of it. They cannot fathom that you are an actual individual living your own life and story. Maybe it's now time to finally do something for you. It's also important to mention that no contact doesn't have to be forever, even though it usually is. Many people are filled with anxiety that stopping all contact with your parents is forever. Maybe you need 6 weeks of no contact to have a chance to breathe and then try again. I will tell you though that I've not had a client that's continued contact after cutting it. Another thing that scares people is the fear of guilt that may come if their parents die. When I was 15, I lost a very close friend of mine tragically. At 18, I lost another close friend. In 2020, I lost my grandfather in his late 70s. And then 5 months later, I lost my father, aged 44. The moral of this shit story is that people die of all ages. If you cut contact and worry about the guilt if something bad happens to them, they will not be sitting there thinking the same thing about you. When clients choose to go no contact, there is one way that works best. I recommend that you write 2 letters. The first letter is written from a place of anger and resentment. In this letter, you get all of your emotions on paper. You tell your parents that they never deserve the title of parents. You give them examples and you tell them to eat shit. Then you have a 10-minute breather before beginning the second letter. The second letter is written from a place of peace. You keep all emotions out of it. Here's a short example of the peaceful letter. I don't mean any disrespect or offense in this letter, and I do not want you to understand my feelings. I am now on the path of peace and healing, and to allow this to flow into my life, I cannot have any contact with you. You don't need to see my point of view, but you do need to respect me as your child. Do not contact me until I contact you. I wish you all the best. Then what we do is burn the angry letter. We set fire to the angry letter and we send the peaceful letter. How does that make you feel? Anxiety and fear are common here. The thing is, you can predict a narcissist. If you sent that letter to your parents, I bet you could predict almost word for word what they would say in their response. This knowingness allows you to draw a line and mentally live separately from your parents, because you understand that they only have a number of set responses to any given situation or conversation, and that gives you power. Another thing to mention is that no contact is no contact. A lot of people will send a letter or a text to go no contact and will wait for a reply. That's what we call contact. The people pleaser. Do you consider yourself a people pleaser? If so, how many people in your life are pleased with you? Have you ever asked yourself why you'd label yourself as one? Why do you feel obligated to please every person that you meet? I'd class myself as one too, you aren't alone, but the majority of the time this stems from our childhood experiences. If you're at work and a colleague is in a bad mood, do you feel as though it's your moral duty to improve their day and elevate their emotions? Why? When in relationships, whether it's romantic or even just within your friendship group, are you the one whose sole purpose is to make sure the general level of happiness stays high, regardless of your own happiness? Can you see how this comes from your childhood? As a child, and especially as a child to emotionally immature and toxic parents, we were more often than not made to tend to our parents' needs. Some would call that people-pleasing. We hated tension and conflict, and whenever our parents were in bad moods, and they'd always let us know, we'd have to take on that responsibility to make them feel better. At the age of 17, I recall my mother saying the words, "If that's all you think I'm worth, don't bother giving them to me," in regards to me only buying her pyjamas for Christmas despite not having a job. I then felt obligated to go out and spend £60, or in other words, my entire net worth, in order for her to feel better about herself. We become people pleasers because we were made to feel guilty for not pleasing our parents. Becoming a people pleaser isn't something you've inherited from your parents. It's something they've molded you into. A lot of our parents are only nice to us if we are benefiting them. So when they're in a bad mood, you feel as though if you don't turn that mood around, then you'll have consequences to face, like rejection. Imagine that you walk into work tomorrow morning and one of your co-workers is visibly in a bad mood, and for some reason you decide that you're not going to try your best to get them out of it. How much would that eat you alive? Can you imagine not even asking them if they were okay? Here is a harsh truth manifested as an affirmation for you to repeat. It is not on me. It is not on me. It's not your job to heal the world whilst simultaneously disregarding your own happiness. Only the individual has the power to control their own emotions, and it is absolutely 110% not on you. If you feel like you need to please every person on this earth, please remember you are one of them. We're not just talking about helping people with their emotions though, are we? Let us dive a little deeper whilst still talking about work. If your boss says, all the paperwork needs to be completed by noon, that's your job. However, if your boss finishes that sentence with, "Can you do that for me?" it then becomes a people-pleasing thing, because now you're not doing it for your job, you're doing it for someone. Even though you'll be paid the exact same amount of money, it's now a personal matter to ensure that your boss's needs are met. Am I right? I bet you also find it extremely difficult to say no to people too. You could have the busiest day planned, but if someone were to ask you for your help on the same day, you'd feel like the world's biggest arsehole if you said no. Funny thing is, we act this way out of fear. We are terrified of feeling the guilt that our parents used to make us feel for not pleasing them and meeting their every demand. Once a person presents us with an opportunity in which we can either please them or not please them, our inner child screams out, "Please, anything but the guilt." When we were made to feel guilty during our childhood, it was mainly for things that we should have never felt guilty for in the first place. Please know that it was never your fault. The guilt stays with us into adulthood if we're not careful, and attaches itself to everything. Whether you're happy in a relationship, earning a good wage, treating yourself to a gift, eating out, or even just being ambitious, we still feel the childhood guilt. Why is this? The guilt. The main reason that we were made to feel guilty is derived from jealousy. How many times can you recall arguing with a parent of yours over a relationship that you were in at the time? Can you remember being screamed at over something completely unnecessary in relation to a person that you were dating at the time? If so, ask yourself this: how bad was that parent with their own relationships? Were they single and unable to find love, or in a relationship that only appeared as love on the surface? Your parents will have had a similar thought process to this. How can my child be happy in a relationship and find love when I am unable to, and I'm the parent, which means I should be the mature one? They develop a jealous attitude towards you and your partner because you were perceived as a threat. They also hated the fact that their love life was a shambles and yours wasn't, because it brought their own emotional insecurities to the surface. Can you think of other times where your parents made you feel guilty when you shouldn't have had to feel that way? If not, no need to panic. I have plenty for you here. What about when you had your first full-time job and started earning your first proper wage? How much of that did they take? And why did they leave you with less than you gave them? Why do so many parents say that they hope we do better than they did, but try their hardest to give us a worse start? Going back to the jealous behaviour, your parents hated the fact that you were now able to spend money in ways that they weren't. Your parents never saw you or even treated you as your own being, but rather as an extension of themselves. So when you started to gain more freedom financially, they hated it. They were jealous of what you had because they too craved it. Having a sense of financial freedom also made your parents realize that you were one step closer to moving out, which meant having less control over you. So they take a cut of your hard-earned wage and still hate the fact that you weren't as miserable as they were, allowing the guilt-tripping technique to take center stage yet again. With the few pennies that you had left, you saved up each month and decided to treat yourself to something new, a new handbag, a pair of shoes, or even a few nights away. How did they react? Was it something along the lines of, how can you buy those things for yourself when you know I don't get to buy myself those kinds of things? Why do parents marry such strange behaviour? Why do so many mothers and fathers not root for their own children's success? I believe it's because so many of our parents wanted children, but didn't want to be parents. Are you ready to have children? Like I said, if you decide to not have children, absolutely fine. But if you decide to not have children because you're afraid you'll turn into your parents and repeat the cycle, that's not fine. I've spoken to many individuals who have made the choice to not have children of their own solely due to the fact that they are terrified of becoming a bad parent like their own parents. This is heartbreaking to hear. Please, if this is your thought process too, listen up. You are not your parents. You are not toxic, you are not manipulative, and you have all the love to give that they couldn't. You may feel like you do not know how to parent, but you do know how not to. The difference between a good parent and a bad parent is simple. A good parent will question whether they are a good or bad parent, but a bad parent will always just assume they're a good one. Please see this from the perspective that I chose to have. Even from my young teenage years, I always knew that I wanted to have children because of the way I was parented. I knew that I could give all the love that I never received. As a child, I found myself craving that parent and child relationship that I never had, but deserved. I knew that I could embody the parent that I never had. That's the golden ticket, I believe. You need to be the parent that you wish you had. That's how you break the chain. That's how you stop the cycle. Teacher. As we now know, our parents taught us how not to parent. Now it's time to talk about other aspects of our life in which we aren't thriving because we only had our parents to learn from. How good are you at regulating your own emotions at this current point in your life? If your answer is bad, then ask yourself how your parents were at regulating theirs. This is another fear that stops people from having children. They are scared of becoming their own bad parents because they taught them everything they know. Listen, again, look at you. Look at the awareness that you have. Most of our parents blamed their behaviour and the way they acted on their own parents. What does this tell us? It tells us that our parents actually did know what bad parenting was, but they chose the easy route by following their parents' footsteps and not changing. They briefly knew the awareness that you currently have, but they deliberately chose to not act on it. That's where you're different. You experienced bad parenting and acted upon that awareness by understanding that you weren't going to be the same. You have chosen this book to heal your mind and to move on from your trauma. You can see that something within you isn't happy, and you know that life has more joy to offer, and you're where you are right now reading this book because you're actively seeking a better life for yourself. Your parents didn't do that. They just became assholes. Back to regulating emotions. What was your parents' go-to response during a frustrating time or during an argument? This could have been anger, verbal abuse, physical abuse, or even the silent treatment. Now, how do you react during the same times? Is it the same way your parents used to, or still do, or the complete opposite? The reason you struggle so much to control your emotions is because you learned from someone who also couldn't. Don't panic. You can choose to change this and relearn who you are emotionally. When we snap out of frustration, or when our immediate go-to response is anger, it's usually because we aren't living in the current moment. Have you ever driven down a long road, and when you get to the end of the road you think, oh shit, I can't remember driving down this road. Was that traffic light even green? Many people live their entire lives in this same sense. The majority of us are usually cruising through life on autopilot, where our bodies take control, which allows our minds to roam freely. Due to this, we often find ourselves living in one or two different places, mentally speaking. We either live with guilt from the past or anxiety for the future. When we think back to bad and traumatic experiences from the past, we relive them within our minds and bodies. When we do this, the past takes our happiness away from the present moment that we're currently in. On the other hand, when we are thinking of the future through the eyes of anxiety and fear, our happiness in the present moment is put on hold until the future is been and gone. As a society, we are guilty of believing things like, I'll be happy when I get that new house. I'll be happy when I get that new job. I'll be happy when I get that new car. Am I right? When we do this, we place our happiness in things and also in future events, which, again, removes all happiness from the present. I'm telling you all of this because when our minds are leaping from one thought to another as we mentally erase our current joy, anger and frustration are the easiest options. If your dog, child, family member does something to annoy you, and at the same time your mind is racing through experiences from the past or future, of course you're going to snap because your mind isn't clear. Now imagine you begin to live more in the present by practicing mindfulness, and then something triggering happens that usually ignites your bad emotions. You'd be able to handle it like a champ. How about authenticity? Many adults are walking about their day-to-day lives without truly knowing who they are. Do you know who you are? Do you know what makes you happy? Or do you just feel as though life is passing you by and you lack a sense of being? Sorry if this feels like a personal attack. This feeling of being lost and having a cloudy sense of personality can also stem from our younger years. When our parents show us that they're living perception first and are putting on a fake mask to the public, it confuses our own idea of self. It not only makes us question who we truly are, but it also makes us wonder who we should be. This one form of behaviour makes us wear these masks in various areas of our lives, different masks too. We portray different characters at home, at work, and at social events. We are conditioned to live as social chameleons. Here's a great Chinese proverb. Tension is who you think you should be. Relaxation is who you are. Our parents often told us things like, I don't like it when you do that, and people won't be friends with you if you do this. This pulls us even further away from being our true selves because we are taught by the people that we look up to most that our authenticity isn't good enough. So how do we change this? How do we discover who we truly are? When we don't experience the childhood that we should have, it stunts the growth of our personalities. We don't get to explore who it is we really are, and that stays with us. Many of us had to mature and grow up earlier than we should have by either becoming parents ourselves to our younger siblings or by having the awareness that we were more emotionally mature than our parents and seeing everything from a higher perspective. When things like these happen and we don't get to have the childhood we deserved, we hold this sense of feeling lost in adulthood. Here's a question. How many hobbies do you currently have? If your answer is none, or you have an excuse for a hobby like walking the dog, it's because maybe you never had the opportunity to figure out what you enjoyed as a child. The best way to overcome this feeling of being lost is to do now what child you would have loved to do. If you would have loved to build Lego all day, but your parents told you it was a waste of money, go out and get yourself some Lego. If you always wanted to sit and play Pokemon all day, do it. It doesn't have to be a hobby though. Many of my clients talk about how they were always made to do chores all day and weren't allowed to relax and were essentially prevented from being an actual child. If you have a similar story, the best thing to help heal your inner child there would be doing absolutely nothing every once in a while. Just relax on the sofa and binge watch all the Harry Potter movies without worrying about responsibilities. Let the sink fill with dishes. You've earned it and you are allowed to chill out. To discover who you are even further, don't be afraid to try new things. You may feel like you're in your element when you play chess, rock climbing, writing, or even painting, but you've never tried. Try new things. What's the worst that can happen? Maybe you'll figure out your sense of self, who knows. I'd highly recommend traveling on your own. This may sound like something scary, but everything outside of your comfort zone usually is. It's time to explore the world through yourself, or explore yourself through the world. I do feel like a bit of an imposter telling you to travel all by yourself, because the closest I got to that idea was spending a week in Lanzarote on my own. However, I learned so much about myself. You also have no one to wait for, no one to agree on ideas and times with. You just do you. I spent a week there in the Canaries, and I went on so many trips. I visited volcanoes, I rode a camel, I even went diving. A year later, I took 2 friends to the same hotel, and we did absolutely nothing. Go explore you. Speaking up. What must have happened during our childhoods that caused us to hate confrontation so much? Was it the dismissal of our feelings? Was it the fact that every time you voiced your truth, you were met with, grow up, other kids have it worse, or there's something wrong with you? Or was it simply because every anger-filled argument could have been a delicate conversation without the need for any escalation? So now, later on in life, when we are faced with a scenario where we have every right to speak up for ourselves, we do not. It's that fear creeping up on us again. We are terrified of our words and feelings being ripped apart. What if we try? What if we try to verbally stand our ground, but are met with the same attitude we received from our parents? Our inner child screams, we can't be rejected and invalidated again, we just can't. So how do we fix this? How do we remove ourselves from the shadows of our parents' neglect? It begins with reconditioning your mind in regards to who you actually are. Throughout your life, your parents continuously belittled you, and they simply weren't emotionally mature enough to validate your feelings. Then, a few years later, they told you that you were shy. Guess what? You believed them. They made you hate yourself for speaking up and being confrontational, and you were made to feel as though you were too unworthy to share your truth. So they diverted your attention and made you believe that it was all down to your shyness. Again, as a child, who are we to question the words that come out of our parents' mouths? As a child, whatever your parents said must have been true, so you believed it. As a matter of fact, you embodied it. When you started forming relationships as a young adult, you felt as though you couldn't even express yourself properly because you truly believed that being shy was simply who you were. You aren't your parents' thoughts, and your power does not rest in their hands. Your power is where it always has been, within. Again, recovering from this all comes down to discovering who you are. The next time you feel an urge to speak up for yourself and you believe that confrontation is the healthiest path to peace, understand that that's your intuition speaking. Those are your thoughts. However, when that little or big voice creeps up and tells you to keep quiet and you begin to doubt your worthiness of speaking your truth, those aren't your thoughts. Those are your parents' thoughts. You are simply channeling the thoughts that your parents conditioned you to believe. Repeat after me. I am not my parents' thoughts. So now with this newly discovered awareness, the next time the situation arises, pause. Say to that belittling voice, ha ha, you're not my thoughts, you're my parents' thoughts. Eat shit and learn who you're supposed to be. Today, a few hours before writing here, I unlocked another trauma-based memory from my childhood. I was sitting on the sofa and Piper, my 2-year-old daughter, jumped up and headbutted me in the eye. I said, ow, 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 in a childlike voice because I didn't want her to know that it actually hurt. And her response was, sorry, sorry. This was the first time that she had said the word sorry with intention. And as she apologized, my heart sank. I told my wife that I hope our daughter isn't afraid of me, to which she replied, why would she be afraid of you? I couldn't even process the fact that she was simply apologizing for hurting me, because if I were to ever accidentally hurt my parents when I was a child, I would have to run as fast as I could. My wife added, she's not going to be scared of you, you've never hit her. It really took me a minute to process. That's another perfect but sad example of how our childhood trauma stays with us until we have the awareness to process it. You're not your parents. My automatic response was that my daughter would be afraid of me and that's why she was apologizing. It hit me initially because it was my first experience of my child apologizing, but maybe the actual trigger for me was the fact that she said it twice. This took me back to my own childhood where I'd say sorry 1,000 times in the space of 10 seconds before sprinting away to avoid any physical repercussions. The thing is, as we explore our awareness around the way we were parented, we become stronger. As we get stronger, our personalities move further and further away from the personalities of our parents. We are terrified of becoming them, and we would hate nothing more than to cause a need for healing in our own children. But don't get it twisted. Many people do not have this awareness that you have, and unfortunately fall into the generational trap of being bad parents themselves. They don't understand that they too have the power within them to create change, and they'll often say things like, well, my mother was a bad mother and so was hers, which leaves the healing to the next generation. You aren't like that. You know what it's like to not receive love, so now you have all that love to give. It's your turn to be the parent that you needed as a child. The generational trauma stops with you. Relearn. Okay, you've spoken your truth, set your boundaries, and unfortunately, but actually fortunately, the time has come to cut ties altogether. To be honest with you, I had it easy. My mother was the one to cut ties with me. We had had several arguments that ended with no contact throughout my life, but this time it was really the finale. When this happens, and when you realize that there will be no more contact between yourself and that parent, you experience a whirlwind of emotions. The first one is usually grief. I thought I'd feel peace. I thought this was going to be easier. Nope, it's not easier. It gets easier. The grief is a weird one. It feels odd because you're at war with yourself. Just like when you tell a bad parent, who believes they're a good parent, how much of a bad parent they were during your childhood, causing a fight to break out within themselves as they battle with this false sense of ego. Good parent, and the cold hard truth, bad parent, you too have conflicting thoughts. You first feel grief because it's as though you no longer have that parent. Like, this is it now, right? Am I an orphan? How do I like being an orphan? Shit, Batman made it look so cool. The other side of the war within you is also screaming out to be heard. Why are you grieving a parent? Did they ever act like one? If they did act like a true parent, would you be cutting contact in the first place? The grief can last for days or even weeks, but what you need to realize is this. You aren't missing that parent. You're missing the idea of them being the perfect parent. You are grieving a hypothetical. Again, would you be cutting contact with them if they were the perfect parent? Also, this newfound grief is accompanied by guilt. Wait, we finally just stood up for ourselves and respected our own peace by putting boundaries in place. What the fuck have I got to feel guilty about? Am I being selfish? Yes, you are. Finally. The guilt we feel is, again, our parents' thoughts echoing through us. We feel bad for hurting their feelings, and that's only because they'd always let you know when you hurt them as a child. You could have been 5 years old and done something so innocent, an accident maybe, and your parents would have made you feel an inch tall for hurting mummy's feelings. So now, when you finally plucked up the courage to put them in their place, you feel bad because you know they'd want you to feel bad. You are simply stuck in that conditioning. Read this book's subtitle again. You are not your parents' thoughts. You deserve happiness. You deserve peace. And you should be so proud of yourself for finally doing something for you. This chapter is named Relearn because that is now your main focus. To relearn who you are. You are now free to choose yourself and discover whoever that person may be. No ties, no influence, and no toxicity. Whenever you feel guilty, they are not your thoughts. Whenever you feel unworthy, they are not your thought. Whenever you feel unloved, choose love. All that love and affection that you never received is still out there for you to find and harness. Who are you without your ties? When we don't have the childhoods that we should have had as children, we are stripped of who we are. Whether we were given too much responsibility and had to become the third parent to our siblings, we received no love or support, or we were physically or emotionally abused. Our childhoods came to an abrupt halt way before they should have. When this occurs, we have our freedom to grow and discover taken away from us. We no longer have the opportunity to figure out who the fuck we are, so now we still don't know. As adults, we hold a sense of feeling lost mentally. It's as though we aren't happy where we are emotionally, but we also have no idea where it is we want to be. We were forced to grow up too quickly, and our personality growth was stunted. Ask your inner child what they thought current you would look like. Who did they think you would be? What would they be doing for income? Now ask yourself, what can I do today to live up to child me's vision? No matter how your inner child would have described current you, the underlying description would be your happiness. At what point did you switch from glass half full to glass half empty? without the strings attached by your parents and without being guided by their negativity compass. Now is the time for you to live glass overflowing. Sometimes, and especially for those of us who hold on to our trauma, it is easier to give advice to others than to follow our own intuition and guidance. So, to make things easier, what advice would you give to someone who is just cut free from their parents' hold and is eager to explore themselves? How should they do it? Is the best revenge success? Is forgiveness the solution to their peace? What about traveling the world so they discover who they truly are? Their possibilities are endless, right? Exactly. So are yours. The ego loves the known, the comfort and the certainty. That's why when we step out of our comfort zone, we feel anxious and terrified of the uncertainty. It's simply a fear of the unknown. Whether it's a new job, a new house, or in our case, reinventing yourself completely, the ego hates doing something that it's never done before. When we're brought up in toxic environments that are filled with hate and insults, that's normality. That's what the ego looks for. So when we finally take the step to be authentic, the ego doesn't know what that is, which is why it becomes scary. So how do we become who we are if we have absolutely zero idea? It's just like any other kind of learning. We take small steps. Throughout life, we gradually receive a greater awareness of our childhood. It goes from feeling normal to feeling different in comparison to others around us to then feeling like abuse. We take this same gradual approach to learning who we are. To reword it, we need to unlearn who we are not. When we're about to start or even apply for a new job or a new promotion and we have a sense of doubt and feel as though we aren't good enough for that position, to whom does those negative thoughts belong? Once you begin to understand that you are essentially channeling your parents' doubts, you take a step. When you get into a new relationship and your partner isn't abusive and doesn't show toxic behavior, you begin to feel unworthy of their love. Throughout your entire childhood, you were conditioned to believe that abuse and toxicity was normal. So to meet a partner who is not those things feels strange. Again, that thought of unworthiness isn't yours. We really do have to unlearn who we are not. Carrying our parents' hatefulness affects us in every aspect of our lives. It can make you feel unworthy of anything and doesn't allow you to speak up in many areas. Here's another example. I recently spoke with a mother who was feeling lonely because she had no friends. Since becoming a mother, all of her old friends had stopped checking in on her. She explained that she was scared to make friends or even ask old friends if they wanted to meet up. This can be due to fear of rejection, scared to speak up, feeling unworthy of having a support network and friendship circle, and the list goes on. The woman then went on to tell me that there was this one other new mother that she knew, but she was afraid to reach out to her. I explained that chances are she's feeling the exact same way too. 2 days later, she got back in touch and thanked me for the advice because they both met up and spent hours together. Both women were too afraid to reach out for friendship, but both craved the same connection. How many times have you wanted to reach out to someone, but your parents' inner voice got in the way and spoiled your happiness? I bet you've never thought about this one before. Did your parents always give you the silent treatment? Did they cause so much anxiety within you that you hated the silence itself because it created so much tension? Did you subconsciously develop a fear of actual silence itself? Here's how you can tell. Do you need the television on to fall asleep? Do you almost always have earphones in? Does there always have to be background noise accompanying you? It's strange to learn how many childhood nastinesses manifest themselves in adulthood, isn't it? How about when you start dating someone new? Do you find yourself almost immediately oversharing your trauma? Why do you think that is? Genuinely, pause here and have a think. You do have the understanding to know why. It's because you want that relationship to work. You crave the love that you deserve and that your parents never gave you. So you overshare what you've been through so the other person knows exactly why you do what you do. Once your partner knows your darkest traumas, you feel as though they'll know you. If you don't tell them about your bad experiences and the memories, and you have an argument with them and you can't regulate your emotions, so you completely shut down, they may take that the wrong way, as though you don't want to be with them. So what you're actually doing when you're oversharing is saying, please understand that I may act certain ways sometimes because things like this happen to me. Please understand who I am because the love you're showing me is love I've never been shown before. Let's talk about what we allow. If we let our parents' beliefs about us infest our minds, we settle for less than we deserve. If I were to ask you to tell me about a time when you settled for less and accepted a situation that you didn't deserve, would you tell me a what or a who? We settle for lower paying jobs, ungratefulness within relationships, and unfair treatment from our work colleagues or family, because that's all we know, and who are we to question any differently? All it takes is for someone to plant a small seed of awareness in your mind. You nurture it with love and understanding, and it blossoms through self-care. When I hold my private sessions with clients, I tell each of them the same thing. This applies for therapy too, in my opinion. When an individual seeks help in the form of therapy or counselling, they are seeking answers. I believe that deep down, that person usually already knows what answers they want, and they simply want you to reaffirm them. Once they hear it from an outside voice, it sinks in and they no longer think they're crazy. So, can I ask you, what answers are you searching for? Take my story for example. My mother, maybe like yours, lives perception first. This becomes so confusing for a child because when you're at home, it's tension and arguments and anger. There is no true family dynamic and the word love isn't in anyone's vocabulary. Yet in public, you were the world's strongest unit. Our parents cared more about the image and the world's perception of them more than they did about us. It was confusing and hurtful because we were taught that kindness within the household was only true in movies, and then taught to lie in public to keep up this false appearance. So for me, the answers that I was searching for, that I already knew and just needed to be reaffirmed back to me, was that my mother wasn't this character that she portrayed in public. As a child, if I were to tell anyone about the way I was treated, I'd get told about all the good things that my mother did for me. Like putting a roof over my head. As children, we feel so disconnected in this situation because no one can see the truth but us. We even question if we are lying or exaggerating because that's what we're also told. Later on in life, when other people could finally see the behaviour, I got my answers that I already knew but almost forgot. With my clients, there's usually a template they follow. They explain their past and then talk about the present. My job is finding the missing link. My job is to find the answer to the questions that they have but haven't actually asked. It sounds weird, but sometimes I feel as though I've done a good job as a coach whenever my client cries. I mean that in a nice way. There's usually a sentence that a client needs to hear in order to release all of those emotions that have been stored for years and years. This can usually appear verbally as, "It wasn't your fault," "It's not on you," or "You don't owe them anything." What sentence are you waiting for? What truth are you hiding about yourself that will trigger that emotional release? Distraction. Following on from needing an emotional release, what have you been doing all this time to distract yourself from those emotions? What is your go-to numb? Your distracting coping mechanism can manifest itself in many forms, including but not limited to drugs, sex, alcohol, food, social media, and even self-harm. When we don't feel like our true, authentic selves, we fake that emotional release that we truly need by escaping our reality in whichever way suits us best. Take alcohol, for example. How many of us complain about every aspect of Monday to Friday as we await the weekend so we can blow our hard-earned wages on alcohol to forget the weekdays? How insane is that? Unfortunately, this has become the social norm. We reach the legal age to drink, and even though it tastes disgusting and leaves us bedbound the next day, we do it because you're seen as weird if you don't. However, we usually drink to escape. We just rarely question the truth behind what we're trying to escape. If you're reading this book or similar others, you should be proud of yourself. You are actively pursuing better. You are trying your best to seek out your own truth, and you know that something within you craves and is more than worthy of a better life. Many people do not seek better, yet complain about not having it. Did you know that seeking better for yourself is self-love? You know deep down that you deserve it. Healing. What do you want? What is the goal here? When clients come to see me, they want to be healed. They are longing to evolve into this healed version of themselves, and chances are that's what you want too. However, are you even aware of what this healed version of you looks like? Have a think about it for a second. So many people are rushing to get to this destination to become healed, but they also have zero idea what it actually looks like. When this is the case, we find ourselves chasing the unknown, meaning that we may never reach it. It becomes important to have a goal here. We can always summarize the end goal and label it as peace, but let us figure out what that looks like for you. Here are a few questions you can ask yourself. If you grew up with loving, caring, and supportive parents, what would you be doing today, and where would you be doing it? When we're children, we truly do believe that the world is ours for the taking, and our desires and ambitions are always out there. We know that we can be an astronaut or an award-winning actor, and it's not until the external doubt and conditioning kicks in that our dreams fade and we aspire to be something that's more realistic. If you grew up with parents who supported your dreams without fail, regardless of what they were, where would you be in life now? Number 2, what would you do every day if money wasn't an object? If you won super big on the lottery tonight, you bought your mansion and villas abroad and your Lamborghinis, how would you spend every day? Number 3, if your parents decided to cut contact with you and they moved to the other side of the world, how would you feel? Would the guilt disappear? Would the dark cloud above your head with their name on it disappear? Would you be able to walk around with your head held high, knowing they aren't going to burden you with their negativity at any given moment? The answer to these 3 questions can give you an insight into what you'd be doing as this healed version of you. Onwards. Now you're on your way. I really, sincerely, genuinely hope this book has helped you. The healed version of you is making itself known. Once you've opened your eyes to the truth about your childhood and the injustice that you were served, you can never close them. Please give yourself some time to allow the information in this book to sit with you. This isn't going to be one quick fix. This is balancing the scales of so many years of conditioning. You deserve peace, and you deserve to heal. You are not your parents' words. You are not your parents' thoughts.